For many years, the gangster film has been a staple of American pop culture. From The Godfather to Goodfellas to Scarface to The Sopranos, viewers have been introduced to various facets of the criminal underworld, with many of these films being considered some of the greatest of all time. Yet one film is very rarely acknowledged. And that film is 2015's Black Mass, directed by Scott Cooper and starring Johnny Depp as real-life Boston mobster James Whitey Bulger. The film came out a mere 3 years ago and has seemingly been written off as just another mob movie, which is disappointing because I think the film is so much more than that. Look, it's not perfect. The relationship between Whitey Bulger and his politician brother Billy feels underdeveloped. The ending is a bit rushed. Depp's acting style, although fantastic in my opinion, might not work for some people. But the part of the film that I love so much, that nobody ever seems to talk about, is how the gangster genre is harshly deconstructed. First of all, we need to acknowledge what the acclaimed gangster films tend to have in common. The main characters are all anti-heroes rather than straight-up villains. The gangsters we meet are usually not above racist behavior.
See, I got business associates who are black. And they don't want my son with their daughters, and I don't want their sons with mine.
You know who goes to jail? Nigger stick-up men, that's who.
In my city, we would keep the traffic in the dark, people, to call it. They're animals anyway, so let them lose their souls.
But they have charisma, and at least some standards that make them somewhat likable. Don Corleone is a gentleman who helps out the less fortunate. Tony Soprano isn't a perfect father, but he does care for his family. Henry Hill can be violent, but he never actually kills anyone. And the one murder that he helps cover up was that of a very unpleasant gangster. These guys may be bad, but they're not that bad. There's a part of us that wants to see these guys succeed, wants to see their criminal influence grow. Black Mass never gives us those sense of standards. Whitey Bulger is not an anti-hero. He's a man doing horrible things, and there's no opponent who's even worse than him that allows us to root for Whitey. We're given no sense of comfort or justification in the violence that we see. The knowledge that he's an FBI informant whose corrupt handler is looking the other way as he commits this violence adds another level of horror to what's going on. Other movies use implied violence against women by other men to make us root for our male protagonist. We cheer when Henry Hill punches the neighbor who sexually harassed his wife. We cheer when Tony Soprano curb stomps the man who sexually threatened his daughter. We cheer when Sonny Corleone assaults his brother-in-law Carlo after learning that Carlo is beating his sister. There's nothing particularly disturbing about the violence for this reason. We view the victims of the violence as people who deserve it, since we know that they've done worse things that our anti-hero would never do. In Black Mass, we never get the sense that any of Whitey Bulger's victims deserve it. Nothing about the violence makes you cheer. Characters like Brian Halloran and Deborah Hussey are built up before they're murdered by Whitey Bulger. Brian Halloran is a potentially unstable criminal and a snitch, but there's nothing to suggest that he's any worse than Whitey Bulger. His death doesn't feel like something worth celebrating. Deborah Hussey is a prostitute and stepdaughter of one of his fellow gang members, Steve Flemmi. She's built up as being a little bit naive, but sweet and well-intentioned. Her death is quick and avoids going into gratuitous territory, but lingers on Flemmi's face as we see her die, reminding us that she was a real person with loved ones. Roger Wheeler, a businessman, is murdered on Bulger's orders, and he's not as built up as a character as these other two are. But the movie is still very clear that he was a completely innocent man who simply happened to uncover an embezzling scheme, who was not involved in the criminal underworld, which makes what happens to him pretty horrifying. One of the most disturbing moments in the movie is when Whitey Bulger threatens Marion Connolly, the innocent wife of the corrupt FBI agent John Connolly that Whitey Bulger has been working with. While Marion doesn't have a lot of screen time, she is given a few scenes earlier in the film that help give her character some dimension that adds extra tension to the scene, almost like she's the audience member, rather than simply using her purely as a flat plot device to showcase Whitey's evil. In this way, the usual trope is flipped on its head. Instead of using violence against women by other men to make Whitey sympathetic, it shows Whitey himself engaging in violence against both men and women, and makes no attempt to give the audience any kind of comfort when we see these scenes of violence unfold. They're disturbing without being gratuitous and serve to make Whitey's increasing criminal influence more unsettling, rather than something we want to root for. With his ice blue eyes and heavy makeup, Whitey Bulger sometimes almost feels inhuman, but Cooper and Depp are careful to not make him so inhumane as to allow the audience to distance themselves from the violence. We see him as a loving father and boyfriend, with no implication that he's abusive or doesn't genuinely love his family. This is used to remind us that he's capable of being a normal guy, but doesn't attempt to use this to excuse his actions. If anything, it feels more horrifying that someone capable of empathy can then proceed to do such horrible things. Tony Soprano never wanted his son to be in the mob.
Told you that's my business, not yours!
Don Corleone did, but only believed in violence as a last resort. While Whitey Bulger encourages his son to be violent as long as he's not caught. It makes Whitey Bulger feel both more human and even more unpleasant.
You do it to or with, huh? You follow?
Yes, I follow. Punch people when no one's looking.
That's exactly right. If nobody sees it, it didn't happen.
If Goodfellas is a gangster film, then perhaps Black Mass could be called the anti-gangster film. Perhaps no comparison is more fitting than the funny guy scene in Goodfellas and the dinner scene in Black Mass. Both take the same basic idea. One guy makes a seemingly innocuous comment to another guy, who responds with hostility.
A little bit of soy.
You said to me, this is a family secret, and you gave it up to me, boom. You spill the secret family recipe today, maybe you fucking spill about me tomorrow. Is that something maybe that's a possibility?
Funny, you know, it's a good story. It's funny. You're a funny guy.
What do you mean? You mean the way I talk? What?
It's just, you know, you're just funny. It's funny, you know, the way you tell the story and everything.
Maybe it's me, I'm a little fucked up, maybe. But I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you. I make you laugh. I'm here to fucking amuse you. What do you mean funny? Funny how? How am I funny?
Before revealing he's joking.
You motherfucker! I almost had him!
Both scenes build up tension before we know the supposedly offended character is just joking around, but the end result is different. Goodfellas releases that tension for everyone in the room. In Black Mass, the tension doesn't really go away. David Harbour's character, John Morris, takes a while to smile, and even then it feels more out of necessity than him actually finding the joke to be funny. The scene doesn't make Whitey Bulger any less frightening, because we've seen so much violence from him at this point, we can't even be sure still that he's not joking. Black Mass also notably lacks scenes of gangsters enjoying the high life. We see Tony Soprano in his mansion and Henry Hill monologuing about how much he loves being a gangster. In Black Mass, we're limited to a single scene in a nightclub, and even that scene has unsettling undertones. Nobody seems particularly happy, almost like they're there more out of obligation than actual enjoyment. When we see the flashes of a dead body of one of Bulger's victims, it serves as a reminder of the consequences of his increasing influence in Boston and how no amount of partying is going to erase that fact. I do want it to be clear that I have no issue with The Godfather, Goodfellas, The Sopranos, and other similar works. These movies are classics for a damn good reason, with their exceptional writing, direction, and character development. But the reason why I admire Black Mass is that it doesn't take the easy way out and commit to a mob story that we've already seen. It attempts to challenge the audience by flipping our expectations and showcasing the serious impact of violence from organized crime. It refuses to give the audience an easy way out, an excuse to relax and enjoy the violence. When I saw Black Mass, I thought it was going to be the film that changed gangster films to come, but it's largely been forgotten. Maybe someday that'll change, because deconstruction is one of the best ways to keep a genre fresh.